Thank you very much, Davida, for that really interesting tale of transformation. I can tell you that being in the business we are in, that is a story that I know. And the transfer from ink to paper has been going on in our business for a long time, to digital delivery under the leadership of Tom Shoup and Catherine Peters, Tim Hartman, and others. We're right there with the GPO in the virtual world. It's now my privilege to introduce Stephen Shapiro, who has taught many thousands of people how they should think more clearly about innovation in their organizations. You have his book. Perhaps its title conveys a message that's a bit different. Perhaps the book itself, rather, conveys a message that's a bit different from the title, Best Practices Are Stupid, just as Catherine Peters told us that our tote bags may look black, but in fact are green. I would guess that there's something of a contrarian message there, Stephen, but we will see. What if everything you know, though, is wrong about, you think you know about creating a culture of innovation is wrong? What if the way you are measuring innovation is in fact choking it? What if your research is asking all the wrong questions? Then, as Stephen will tell us, it's time to innovate the way you innovate. Stephen Shapiro is one of the nation's foremost innovation advisors. His methods have helped major organizations, Staples, General Electric, NASA, and the Air Force among them, to transform their businesses. He teaches clients that innovation isn't just about generating occasional new ideas. It's also about staying one step ahead of the competition. So he says, for example, you should hire people you don't like, and you should forget about thinking outside the box. Now, I don't want to give away the rest of the story. Welcome to Stephen Shapiro.
Thank you. So today we're here to talk about doing more with less, and I actually have a little less time than I thought, so I might not get through all 3.5 points that I want to make. But what I want to do is actually jump right in. I have to say, this is really cool. I love the fact that right up here, where was it? It says Innovation Best Practices. I was sitting right here. I love that, Innovation Best Practices. And someone once said to me, well, isn't telling people to not use best practices a best practice? So my head was sort of spinning with that. So today what I want to talk about are some things that we can do inside the organizations that are simple. We're not going to make this heavy. This is the last piece of the day. And I want to try to start off with an assessment of something which I think is going to be important, which is how fast does your brain work? Because if we're going to work fast, it'd probably be helpful to have a brain that is fast. If we can get the slides up here. So here's what I need everybody to do. I need everybody to grab a sheet of paper and a pen. And ideally, it's not in a really fancy, nice, leather-bound book, because this is something you will want to throw away when you're done. So we're going to have a competition here. We're going to have a competition to see who can write down the most numbers. I have on this sheet of paper dozens and dozens of numbers. And I'm going to shout out these numbers in rapid-fire fashion. And what you need to do is write down as many of these numbers as you can, and then interspersed in the middle of these numbers, I will give you a command. It'll be a command for you to write something down. You need to write something down in order to be eligible for the prize. And the reason why we have you do this is it causes a brain interrupt. It causes you to stop focusing on the numbers and shifts you to something else. I'll then read you a bunch of other numbers, and the person who is able to write down the most numbers accurately will win a prize. By the way, one of the things we found, according to our studies, is that men are able to get 10% more accuracy than women. So the women, I want you to prove that this is wrong. So everybody get out your piece of paper, your pencil, whatever it is. We're going to go fast here. 47, 88, 33, 254, 165, 77, 83, 1,488, 99, 77, 652, 88, 90, 30.12, 37, 963, 747, 852, write down a color, 47, 88, 399, 456, 688, 432, 847, 956, 652, write down a piece of furniture, 97, 99, 452, 1,675, 6,742, 22, 88, write down the name of a genius, 47, 88, 362, 952, 1,477. Put your pens down. Anybody think you got all of them right? All right, well, who cares? Because I don't care about the numbers. I'm actually interested in what you wrote down to my command. So what I want everybody to do is to stand up. I want everybody to stand up. If when I asked you to write down a color, you did not write down a color, or you wrote something that wasn't a color, please sit down. If when you did write down a color, you wrote down blue, green, red, or yellow, please take a seat. All right, we lost a few people here. Purple, pink, anybody else? How about orange? Yep, purple or pink, sit down. Brown or orange? Black? Anybody left? What did you have? Coal. I've never heard that. Like tens of thousands of people. And? Color. Write down a color. We'll let you slide with that one. All right, everybody stand back up. For the piece of furniture, if you wrote down table, chair, sofa, couch, or desk, please take a seat. If you wrote down bed, please take a seat. There's always somebody who sits down at that point. Good. What did you have over here? Nothing. Nothing. OK, well, you sit down for that one. Nothing? OK, well, again, you're not eligible. A piece of furniture. So color, piece of furniture. Good? Furniture, OK. So basically, nobody wrote down a piece of furniture other than the ones that I actually wrote down. Good. Everybody stand back up. If for a genius you didn't write anything, or you wrote a genius, or you wrote Einstein, please sit down. Usually the stragglers are going to be Edison, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, or if you wrote down your own name or the name of someone you work with because you're sucking up to them, you can't take a seat. Yeah, we lose most of the people at that point. Good. How about over there? Feynman. Richard Feynman. My favorite. Fantastic. Over here. Your mom. Oh, I've never heard that one. Fantastic. All right, so very good. Oh, one more? That's sucking up. Sorry. That's excellent. So now here's the point of this. Here's the point. Is I know we're all under time pressure. We are all working quickly, but one of the things that happens is when we are put under pressure, time pressure or other, we will naturally go to our pre-programmed responses. As a kid, we were always taught that the primary colors of one form or another were blue, green, red, or yellow. We found that between 75 and 95% of audiences will choose that as their first response. The furniture, same thing. So what happens is that we need to get, one of the things we need to get, first of all, is that expertise is the enemy of innovation. Expertise is the enemy of innovation because the more we know about a topic, the more we will quickly come up with an answer. It's like that thing, you know, you lose your keys. I mean, I'm a messy person. You lose your keys, and you know, if you're like me, it takes you 15 minutes to find your keys, and when you find them, there's something you always say to yourself. Can you believe it? They were in the last place I looked. Well, of course, who finds something and keeps on looking for it? And the same thing is true of the brain. So when you're an expert, you will find solutions quickly, but they're not going to be new or breakthrough. Now, here's one of the key things that I want people in government to get, is that innovation can be efficient. If you hang around with the people who think like you, talk like you, act like you, we talk about creating a culture of innovation. Well, guess what? If you look up the word culture in a dictionary, it is related to the word cult. Basically, there's no thinking involved in cults. And creating a culture of innovation is actually a bit of an oxymoron. What we need to do is recognize that it is divergent points of view that enable innovation. And there's no place more important for that here than in DC. So what we need to get is that our pre-programmed responses are the things that are going to stop us. Now, I'm going to tell you an interesting story that's not so much about innovation, but it shows us the impact of time pressure on how we innovate, or how we do things in general on our performance. I had the great pleasure when I lived in England for a few years to work for a Formula One race car team. And if you don't know what the race car teams, what Formula One is like, don't worry about that, but they're basically really fast cars. And if you've ever seen a race before of any kind of motorsport, you'll know there's the pit crew. The pit crew are the people who change the tires, fuel the car, do the minor maintenance in a matter of seconds. 3 seconds, if there's like very little fuel. 4 seconds, 5 seconds. So the way they get a pit crew to go fast is they sit there with a stopwatch and they time them. And they have them do these motions over and over and over, literally hundreds of times. There's a point that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, no matter how hard they push themselves, they can't go even 1/1000th of a second faster. This is their best possible speed. So as an experiment, though, we tried something. The pit crew members were told, instead of focusing on the speed, on the stopwatch, they were told to focus on their style. That is, they were going to be evaluated on how smooth their motions were. If they were changing the tire, they were to think smooth. If they were fueling the car, they were to think smooth. What they found was that the pit crew, when they weren't focused on going fast, actually shaved off 0.2 to 0.3 of a second off of what seemed to be the best possible time. And when you asked the pit crew members if they were going faster or slower, everyone in the pit crew thought they were actually going slower. There's actually this performance paradox. This has been studied for years, and it's just really interesting. I'll just draw you a quick chart here. Since I have my iPad and we can do that, what we'll do is we're just going to look at the relationship between motivation, stress, whatever you want to call it, and performance. And what we find pretty consistently is that when there is no motivation, there is no performance. And that's not unusual. I mean, if you don't have any incentive, you're not going to do anything. So we see that there's an increase, and then at some point, what you find is that you hit your peak. And for physical athletic endeavors, there is a drop-off in performance. We actually over-motivate people. As we're focused on intellectual activities, so if these are athletic activities, these are intellectual activities, what we find is that they drop off more. Anything requiring concentration, the more you're stressed, there's a point where stress is good, and then there's a point where stress is bad. What we find with creative endeavors, and that's an I, creative endeavors is creativity can be killed, as we demonstrated with this exercise, 100%. So we've done a couple of experiments. I mean, this sounds like maybe a goofy experiment, but there's a company that was needed to develop 40 new innovations a day. What they do doesn't matter, but they need to develop 40 new innovations a day. And when they were focused on trying to develop 40 new innovations a day, they could never develop 40 new innovations. So the experiment was to take everybody out for the first 30 minutes of the day and do what would be considered non-productive work. They went on a meditation. For 30 minutes at the beginning of the day, instead of focusing on their work, they were to clear their mind. And what they found was that they consistently, when they started their day off that way, hit the numbers. Here's the reason why. And you know this. When are you most creative? When you're taking a shower, when you're falling asleep, when you're waking up, if you do yoga, whatever these things are, these flood of creative energies start to come to you, and there's a reason. If you would actually look in the brain, there's a part of the brain that gets activated under stress, and when we are thinking heavily, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that literally chokes off the pathway to creative thinking. So what we need to do is quiet that down in order to have creativity. The more we focus on where we're going, quite often the less likely we are to get there. So the point is, sometimes to go fast, you actually need to go slowly. You actually need to slow things down. When you're with your teams, look at the stress levels. Look at, are you focused on output or are you focused on the process? The process is where the results take place, not the output. The second you get focused on the future, you won't perform as well. We've done experiments with salespeople. We actually found that when people were measured on how much they sold less than people who were measured on how well they served the customer. So what we want to do is get into these present moment activities. That will speed up our ability to innovate. Now, there's something else that we can do that will help us innovate a little bit better. And here's a tale of two idea programs. And I know I've heard a lot of conversations around idea programs where you ask people for their opinions, suggestions, and thoughts. One of these programs was able to implement ideas on average that were net value, net savings. These were actually cost savings idea program of $126. The other program was able to save well over $6,000. Also, these two idea programs, one of them was able to save, actually, the generated value per employee was $200 versus the other one, which was $4,200 per employee. Now, you may think that having a higher value per idea was a good thing. But in fact, here's the results. This was work done comparing US idea programs to Japanese idea programs. And what they found was that the Japanese idea program, the average value of an implemented idea was only $120. Only $120. Whereas in the US, it was over $6,000. Yet, somehow, the value per employee in Japan was $4,200 versus $200. And here's the reason why. And these are two important things when it comes to innovation. One is the level of engagement and participation. They had 8 times more participation. The US programs had only 0.12 ideas per employee on average, whereas the Japanese programs had 37. The engagement was 80% in the Japanese programs, whereas less than 10% in the US programs. And then to me, one of the key things is the ability to implement. I was listening in a number of the conversations taking place, and the issue has always been failure. The reason why things fail is we try to bite off too much. So the adoption rate is much higher when you have something small, which gives you a much higher aggregate. And the key point here is that sometimes if we want to be able to win big, we need to think small. We need to implement a lot of small things. Very simple concept. Have every person in your organization think about 3 things they can do that one day, that morning, first thing of the day. What are 3 things they can do that'll have an impact? Small impact. I mean, these, again, small things that we're talking about here. But these things will accumulate and add up. Over the course of a year, each employee will have roughly 600 things that they will have implemented. An organization of 1,000 people have over 500,000 things implemented. The aggregate impact is huge. It also gets into this mindset of experimentation. Think about things not as big implementation projects, but rather small experiments that we can implement. I love this example. This is something from the CDC, sorry, the Center for Disease Control. One of the things that they've always been challenged with is trying to get the disaster preparedness, getting people ready for hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. So what they did was they created a blog, which is basically this preparing for a zombie apocalypse. And it's a really interesting website. It's fun. It's playful. Now, just to give you a few statistics on this thing, they received 3.6 billion impressions. 3.6 billion impressions. They actually brought down the servers of the CDC. They valued the marketing input of this. What if they were actually try to buy this as a marketing initiative in terms of the value would be over $3.5 million. Any guesses as to the total cost for this thing? $87. It cost $87 to develop this. Sometimes the small things can add up to be big things. The last thing that I will probably have time for is to talk about something which I think is really important. And we're going to do this through a quick exercise. How many of you were fans of the NCAA tournament when it was out recently? And how many of you really couldn't care less? All right, for those of you who couldn't care less, imagine this is a chess tournament with 64 people, or tennis, or whatever it is that you like. I'm going to give you the background on this. When you know the answer, raise your hand. Do not shout out the answer. I'm going to actually come into the audience and see if you have the answer right. Only raise your hand when you are 100% sure you have the answer. So imagine a tournament, 64 teams or individuals playing. This is what they call single elimination. Single elimination means that two teams play against each other. The winner advances to the next round. The loser is eliminated. So here's the question. How many games need to be played in order to determine which team is the champion? When you're 100% sure you know the answer, you can raise your hand. Don't shout out the answer. 100% sure. And if you want, you can draw the brackets down there. And all right, let me just go in here and nope. One is the really creative answer, but I'm looking to know how many really, truly need to be played. Oh, one is the really creative answer. I want the actual number of games that actually need to be played. Nope. Nope. All right, we can do this for a while. Yeah. Very good. Nope. OK, we'll stop there. Don't have a very good hit rate on this. So I'm going to ask the question in a different way. I'm going to ask the question in a different way. The question is, how many games need to be played in order to eliminate all of the losers? If there's 64 teams playing and there's one team that wins, how many teams need to lose? 63. How many games need to be played? And the answer is 63. Here's the point. The way you ask a question will have an impact on how you solve the problem. If there's one thing I want you to take away from what I'm talking about today, it is this. Better questions lead to better solutions. It is the single most important thing. If I were to give you one quote around innovation that I think is useful, it is this. It's from Einstein. He reputedly said, if I had an hour to save the world, I would spend 59 minutes defining the problem, 1 minute finding solutions. 59 minutes defining the problem, 1 minute finding solutions. From my experience, most organizations are running around spending 60 minutes on things that don't matter. Idea programs tend to fail because there's too much noise and too little value and too much work to convert them to something of value. So if you're to do one thing as a discipline, it is this. Ask better questions. I'll give you one example of this. Education. So a nonprofit in the UK wanted to improve the educational system of the UK. And if you think about what is involved in improving education, it's a lot of things. It's teachers, it's classrooms, it's the curriculum, it's technology. The list goes on and on. And every time somebody tries to crack the code on education, it is a problem that can't be solved. So the question is, not how do we improve education, the question is, how do we improve a child's learning, which is the ultimate goal, and what is the single greatest influencer on a child's education, on their ability to learn? Guesses? Parents, exactly. Parental involvement is the single greatest challenge. If we can do this one thing, all the other things become significantly less important. So when they phrased the question, not about how do we improve education, but rather how do we get parents engaged, they were able to quickly find a solution in Bogota, Colombia, where there's an experimental school where they have 100% parental involvement. Someone is already solving this problem in a microcosm of what the UK is trying to struggle with. So when we look at these big problems, I mean, the Exxon Valdez, the BP oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, they set up a website. I mean, we're all into crowdsourcing these days. Well, they set up a website, and they got 123,000 submissions on how to stop the flow of the oil. Of those, how many of them had any value at all? Less than a dozen. That's 99.99% of the time spent on things that don't add value. If you have an infinite amount of time, you can spend as much time as you want and ultimately find solutions. But if we are time constrained, we need to start thinking about how do we accelerate the way we do things. And part of that is to ask better questions and get everybody to rally around those questions. Here's the nice thing with questions. When we have ideas and we ask people, what do you think we should do, you need to eventually, at some point, find money for it. You need to find sponsorship for it. You need to find resources for it. And we have to go through this selling process after the idea has been generated. If we use this mindset of defining the challenge first, then what we can do is get the sponsor of that, and we can get the money and the resources. This process accelerates things and significantly reduces the noise. So we've all heard the expression, think outside the box. I'm sure you've all been told that at some point or another. Well, I think this cat has more intelligence than someone who says, think outside the box. It says, I don't care what anyone else says. I do my best thinking inside the box. See, here's the thing. What we want to do is we want to, instead of thinking outside the box, we want to find a better box. We want to be able to articulate what is it that if we could solve this problem and define it in a way that is, I'll do something, actually I won't do this, but we need to define it in a way that is specific enough that we eliminate a lot of the noise, yet not so specific that we are prescribing a solution. We call this the Goldilocks principle. We want solutions that are challenges that are defined just right. So sometimes what we need to do is if we want to find better solutions, we need to be able to ask better questions. And again, to me, this is like the key thing. If there's one thing that you take away from anything that I talked about today, it would be that. So I actually want to close with a quote. Because I love this quote. I think it's a great quote. And maybe some of you have heard this before. Has it been read before? How many people have heard this before? It's really great. It was from a Yale professor, and he said that I find for myself my first thought is never my best thought. My first thought is always someone else's. It's always what I've heard about the subject, always conventional wisdom. Again, think about the stress exercise that we did. Our natural inclination is to go to the solutions we've already heard before, the solutions we've already had, and if we're an expert, the things we've already thought about in the past. It's only by concentrating, sticking to the question, being patient, letting all the parts of my mind come into play that I arrive at an original idea. By giving my brain a chance to make associations and draw connections. Steve Jobs once said that creativity is just having enough dots to connect. Just having enough dots to connect. Dots being ideas or experiences. And he said the reason why creative people are so is they've either had more experiences or they've thought more about their experiences than other people. So this is about making connections. You want to take me by surprise, and even often that doesn't turn out to be very good. I need time to think about it, to make mistakes, recognize them, to make false starts, to correct them, and then here's to me the most important point. To outlast my impulses, to defeat my desire to declare the job done and to move on to the next thing. If we want to innovate in a time when we don't have enough time, we need to recognize the impact that stress has on our performance and be able to quiet that stressed part of the brain. We need to start focusing on smaller wins that get higher levels of engagement, higher levels of implementation, and then finally, most important, asking better questions in a way that will yield better, faster solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. That was terrific. Not only was I a million miles off on the bracket question, I had Einstein in a blue chair in the initial exercise, so I officially feel like I'm the least creative person in the room. I hope all of you did better for the sake of our country's future than I did. But thank you again, Stephen. That was a terrific way to end the day. And on behalf of my colleagues, Tim and Catherine, I want to thank all of our sponsors, all of our speakers today, and most importantly, all of you for being here and for your willingness to share and collaborate. So please give yourselves a round of applause. I also wanted to say just a quick word of thanks to our events team, our leader Jessica Newhall and her team, Megan Hupp and Catherine Faulkner in particular. The three of them worked for months to put this together, and if you wonder how you can put together an event of this magnitude with only 3 people, you haven't met these 3 people. So thank you very much to them. And that's going to wrap us up for the day, but we're not quite done yet. Please join us. We've got a great networking reception out in the atrium, underwritten by McKinsey & Company, and I look forward to seeing all of you out there. And again, back here on September 6th for the next edition of Excellence in Government. Thanks.